The hostess didn't even look up when Adeline walked in. That was the first thing. Not a glance, not a pause, not the half-second of acknowledgement that most people extend to another human being, simply because they're standing there. The woman behind the podium, young, blonde, wearing a headset she probably didn't need, just kept tapping at her screen like Adeline was a smudge on the glass door she'd already walked through. Adeline stood at the entrance of Crestwood, one of the most expensive restaurants in the state of Georgia, wearing a navy cardigan she'd had for 11 years and carrying a canvas tote that said Savannah Botanical Garden on the side. Her hair was pulled back simply, no jewelry except her watch, not because she didn't own any, but because she hadn't bothered. It was a Tuesday. She hadn't expected to need armor. She cleared her throat. The hostess looked up, and something shifted in her face, not recognition exactly, more like a rapid calculation, the kind people do when they're deciding whether someone is worth their energy. She apparently decided, no. Do you have a reservation? The question landed flat, like a stone dropped in sand. No welcome, no good evening, no gesture toward the warmth that every server handbook in the country instructs. Yes, Adeline said. 8 o'clock, Voss. The hostess tapped again. A pause. I'm not seeing it. Try the first name, Adeline. Another tap. A small frown. Not the apologetic kind, the suspicious kind. There's a reservation here under Howard Voss. That's my husband. I'm his wife. The hostess looked at her. Just looked. And in that look was a very specific language that required no translation. You don't look like a Howard Voss kind of wife. He's not with you? He's joining me later. I'm early. We typically hold reservations for the full party. Adeline tilted her head slightly. That's an interesting policy for a restaurant that charges $40 for a salad. The hostess didn't smile. I can seat you at the bar until your party arrives. My party is my husband. He'll be here in 30 minutes. I'd like the table, ma'am. Our policy. Your policy, Adeline said. Still calm, still quiet. Doesn't appear to be printed anywhere on your website, your menu, or your door. So I'd like to speak to whoever made it up. The manager's name was Dale Pruitt. He came out from the back with a particular expression that managers acquire after years of handling what privately call situations. Polite, practiced, faintly condescending. He was tall, mid-40s, wearing a jacket that fit him like he'd bought it at a time when he was more hopeful about his career. Good evening, he said, extending a hand. I understand there's a bit of confusion. Adeline shook it. No confusion. I have a reservation. I'd like to be seated. Of course, we just prefer, Dale. She said his name quietly, the way you say someone's name when you want them to pay attention. I've been standing at your host stand for 4 minutes. Your hostess looked at me, at my clothes, at this bag, and decided I wasn't worth the effort. And now you're standing here using the word prefer, like I'm asking for something unreasonable. She paused. I'm asking to sit down in a restaurant where my husband has spent more money in the last 2 years than most people spend on a car. Dale's expression rearranged itself, not into apology, into something more careful. Mrs. Voss, he began. I'll wait, she said, at the table. He seated her at the table. But that wasn't the end of it. Not even close. The waiter assigned to table 14 that evening was a young man named Colton, early 20s. Earnest in the way that people are when they're new enough to a job to still believe it reflects their worth. He came over with menus and set one in front of Adeline without quite looking at her. Can I get you started with something to drink while you wait for the rest of your party? I'm not waiting for a party, just my husband. And yes, the Barolo, the 2018 if you have it open. Colton paused. He glanced at the wine list in her hands. She'd already opened to the right page, and then looked back at her face, like he was trying to reconcile two things that weren't fitting together. That's a bottle, ma'am. $340. I know what it is, she said. I've had it here before. I can bring it, of course. I just want to make sure. Colton, she'd read his name tag. Bring the bottle. He brought the bottle. He poured it with shaking hands, which she found almost endearing. Adeline sat alone at a table for 4 in the best section of Crestwood and drank a glass of very good wine and watched the room. She'd always been good at watching rooms. It was one of the things Howard loved about her, that she could sit in total stillness and absorb everything around her while giving away nothing of herself. The couple at the next table kept glancing over, not unkindly, but with the vague puzzlement of people who couldn't quite file her correctly. She didn't match the room. She knew that. She'd dressed for a Tuesday, not for a performance. She checked her watch. Howard was running 25 minutes late. She'd gotten a text while the manager was still rearranging his face. Something with a call from Singapore. Always something. She didn't mind. She'd learned long ago that the best thing you could do with unexpected time alone was simply to be in it. She was on her second glass when Dale came back. He came back with someone else this time. A woman, 50s, silver hair, wearing the kind of silk blouse that announces itself as expensive from 10 feet away. She was introduced as Beverly, the general manager. Beverly did not extend her hand. "Mrs. Voss," she said, sliding into the seat across the table with the ease of someone who considered this her room, "I wanted to come speak with you personally. I understand there was a misunderstanding earlier." "There wasn't a misunderstanding," Adeline said. "There was a judgment." Beverly smiled tightly. "I apologize if you felt." "I didn't feel anything, Beverly. I observed something. Your hostess decided I didn't belong here based on what I was wearing. Your manager came out to manage me rather than apologize. And now you're here using the word felt to suggest that what happened was a matter of my perception rather than her behavior." She set down her wine glass. "I'm curious. Do you know who I am?" Beverly's smile didn't waver. "You mentioned your husband's name. Howard Voss." "I did. He's a valued guest. He is." Adeline folded her hands on the table. "And who am I in that sentence?" Beverly didn't answer, which was its own kind of answer. "I'm going to finish my dinner," Adeline said. "And then I'd like the check for the evening, the full reservation history under my husband's name, and a copy of your employee training materials on guest relations." She paused. "If you want to talk about why I'm asking for those things, we can do that right now. If you'd prefer to wait, that works too. I'm not in a hurry." Beverly stared at her. Something was happening behind her eyes. A recalculation, a growing unease that she wasn't quite managing to suppress. She'd been in hospitality for 30 years. She'd handled difficult guests before. But there was something about the way this woman sat, spine straight, voice quiet, hands folded, that felt less like a difficult guest and more like something else entirely. "I'll have our guest services team prepare anything you need," Beverly said. "Thank you." Beverly stood, smoothed her blouse, walked back toward the kitchen without looking at Dale, who followed her like a dog that knows it's in trouble. Howard arrived at 8:47. Howard Voss was not a man who entered rooms quietly. Not because he was loud, he wasn't, exactly, but because rooms responded to him the way iron filings respond to a magnet. He was 61, silver-haired, broad-shouldered, and wearing a suit that cost more than the car Dale Pruitt drove to work. The hostess looked up the moment he walked in. She smiled. She came around the podium. She actually pointed him toward the best section of the restaurant, like she'd been waiting all evening for a guest worth the effort. Adeline watched this from table 14. She watched the hostess touch Howard's arm lightly, a gesture of welcome, and say something that made him laugh. She watched Dale appear from nowhere, hand extended. "Mr. Voss, wonderful to have you. Your wife is right this way." She watched all of it with the particular clarity of someone who has spent years observing the invisible machinery of how the world sorts people. Howard spotted her, and his face did what it always did, settled into something warm and private, the expression he saved for her and their dog, and occasionally a really good piece of music. He sat down, kissed her cheek. "How long did they make you wait?" he asked, because he knew her, and because he'd learned that wait covered a lot of ground. "Long enough," she said. He picked up his menu. Then he looked at her more carefully. He'd learned to read the stillness, too, after 23 years. He knew the difference between her "everything is fine" stillness and her "something happened and I'm deciding what to do about it" stillness. "Tell me," he said. She told him, quietly, without drama, in the same low voice she used to describe most things. The hostess. The policy that wasn't a policy. Dale's careful condescension. Beverly's silk blouse and her use of the word felt. Howard listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't perform outrage, which was one of the things she appreciated most about him. He just listened, and when she was done, he set his menu down. "What do you want to do?" he asked. This was the question she loved. Not "I'll handle it," not "let me call someone." Always, "What do you want to do?" Adeline picked up her wine glass, considered it. "I want to finish dinner," she said. "And then I want to make a phone call." They had the duck and the Barolo, and a dessert that was too sweet but that she ordered anyway, because the evening seemed to call for something indulgent. Howard told her about Singapore. She told him about a brief she'd been working on, which he listened to with genuine attention, even though he understood maybe 40% of the legal specifics. They'd been married long enough that silence was also a conversation. They sat in it comfortably while the restaurant moved around them, plates appearing and disappearing, the noise level rising and falling with the rhythm of a room full of people who believed they were exactly where they were supposed to be. Dale came by once, near the end of the meal. He was all warmth now. "Mr. Voss, is everything to your satisfaction? Please let me know if there's anything at all." He didn't address Adeline directly. He'd apparently decided that she was someone to be managed around rather than to. Howard said, "Actually, I wanted to ask about the reservation process. My wife arrived before me and there seemed to be some difficulty." Dale's face performed a complex maneuver. "We certainly apologize for any inconvenience." "It wasn't an inconvenience," Howard said. His voice was pleasant and absolutely flat. "It was a choice your staff made. I'd like to understand it." Dale looked at Adeline for the first time since Beverly's visit, really looked at her. "Of course," he said. "We'll absolutely review the interaction." "Good," Howard said, and returned to his dessert. Adeline said nothing. She was thinking about the phone call. She made it from the car in the parking lot, while Howard warmed up the engine. The line rang twice. "Adeline." The voice on the other end was brisk, familiar, a little surprised. "It's almost 10. I know, Jonathan. I'm sorry. Do you have 5 minutes?" A pause. Jonathan Marsh had been the chairman of the Georgia Restaurant Association's Ethics Board for 6 years. He was also, incidentally, someone who owed Adeline Voss a favor of the kind that doesn't expire. She'd written a letter for his son's bar application 2 years ago, when it looked like a prior incident might keep the young man from being admitted. The son was now a practicing attorney in Macon. "I have 5 minutes," Jonathan said. She told him what had happened, exactly as she'd told Howard, quiet, specific, without embellishment. The hostess's face when she'd walked in, the policy that didn't exist, Beverly's use of the word felt. She told him the name of the restaurant and the names of the people involved. Jonathan was quiet for a moment. "Adeline," he said, "you know who you are. Half the people on the State Judiciary Committee have eaten at that restaurant." "I know," she said, "and Beverly's going to know who you are the moment she probably already does," Adeline said. "That's not the point, Jonathan." Another pause. "What is the point?" "The point is that it shouldn't matter who I am." She looked out through the windshield at the lights of the parking lot. Howard was pretending to check his phone, giving her the call. "The point is what would have happened if I were nobody. If I were just a woman in a cardigan and a canvas tote who happened to want dinner." She paused. "That's the point." Jonathan was quiet for long enough that she thought the call might have dropped. Then, "What do you need?" What she needed, it turned out, was not dramatic. It was procedural, which was its own kind of devastating. Jonathan filed a formal complaint with the association the next morning, because Adeline had requested the reservation history and training materials, and because Beverly, in her expensive blouse, had not yet figured out why. The restaurant had already begun pulling documentation. That documentation, as it happened, showed a pattern. Not just one Tuesday evening, not just one woman in a cardigan. The complaint triggered a review. The review triggered interviews. The interviews turned up 3 other incidents in the past 14 months, all variations on the same theme. Guests who were assessed on arrival and found wanting. Guests who were steered toward the bar or the patio or a smaller table in a less desirable section. Guests who did not match the invisible image that Crestwood had apparently decided represented its clientele. None of those guests had been Adeline Voss, Federal Circuit Court judge, appointed 6 years ago, considered for the Supreme Court shortlist in the last 2 administration cycles. Most of them had simply been people who had wanted dinner and received instead a quiet, practiced form of dismissal. The association's formal finding came 43 days after the complaint was filed. It was not a criminal judgment. It was never going to be that, but it was public, which in the restaurant industry is sometimes worse. Crestwood received a formal censure and a mandatory retraining requirement. Beverly resigned before the finding was published, which suggested she had known it was coming. The hostess, who was 24 years old and had apparently never been told that what she was doing was wrong, only that it was how it was done, was let go, which Adeline thought was both inevitable and a little bit sad. Dale Pruitt remained. She wasn't sure how she felt about that. Crestwood's Yelp page, in the 48 hours after the finding became public, went from 4.2 stars to 2.7. Whether that was justice or just the internet, being the internet, was a question she didn't spend much time on. Howard read about the finding over breakfast. He put the paper down and looked at her. "You could have done more," he said. "Not a judgment, an observation. I know." She poured her coffee. "That's not why I did it." He nodded. He knew that. She'd never needed to use his name, his money, his connections, the vast machinery of Howard Voss's life that she'd married into and that people expected her to leverage. She'd used her own name, her own standing, her own 30-year record of being exactly who she was, in whatever room she walked into. But she thought about the 3 other incidents, the other guests, the people who had been steered to the bar or the patio and had probably accepted it. Quietly, without complaint, because that was what you learned to do when the world kept telling you that you'd assessed the situation wrong, that it was your perception, that you had felt rather than observed. She thought about that a lot, in the weeks afterward. Not what had been done to her. That had resolved itself the moment it happened, the moment she'd understood exactly what she was looking at and exactly what she was going to do about it. She thought about what gets done to the people who don't have a Jonathan Marsh to call at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday. The people who don't have 30 years of jurisprudence behind them, who don't have a name that makes ethics boards move quickly. She thought about them sitting at the bar, with their wrong clothes and their wrong bags, drinking whatever the hostess decided they deserved. She thought about all the rooms in the world that sort people at the door and call it policy. There's something that gets said about situations like this one. People say, at least she had the power to fight back. And they say it like it's a comfort. Like the story ends in the right place because the person it happened to turned out to have resources. A name, a title, a favor owed. But that's exactly where the story becomes uncomfortable, if you're willing to sit with it. Because Adeline Voss will tell you, and she has said this, in interviews, in a speech she gave at Emory Law School 2 years after the Crestwood incident, standing at a podium in a room full of people who were going to spend the rest of their careers deciding who deserves what. She will tell you that the night she walked into that restaurant, she was a woman in a cardigan with a canvas tote. That was all she was. And everything that happened to her would have happened to anyone who walked in wearing what she wore, carrying what she carried, looking the way she looked. The finding, the censure, the resignation. Those came later. Those came because of who she turned out to be. But the look on the hostess's face, that quick, practiced, invisible calculation, that didn't come from knowing who she was. That came from deciding who she wasn't. And there are 1,000 restaurants, 1,000 host stands, 1,000 small moments of practiced dismissal that never get a formal finding, never get a public censure, never get a Yelp rating collapse. 1,000 people who walk in wanting nothing more than a table and a glass of wine and an evening that belongs to them. Most of them don't have a Jonathan to call. Most of them don't have 30 years of judicial record standing behind them like quiet armor. Most of them just go home. And that, not what happened to Adeline Voss, but what happens to all the people who are not Adeline Voss, that is the thing worth talking about. If you've been in that position, if you know that feeling, that specific weight of being looked through rather than looked at, this story was for you. And if you know someone who needs to hear it, share it with them. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't a phone call to an ethics board. Sometimes it's just making sure someone knows they weren't wrong for feeling what they felt, that it happened, that it was real. Drop a comment and tell me, have you ever walked into a room and been made to feel like you didn't belong there? What did you do? Like this video if you think dignity shouldn't come with a dress code. Subscribe to Velvet Reckoning, because some stories need to be told out loud. And I'll see you in the next one.